Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. So full disclosure, this is not an original idea at all. I was inspired to do this video after seeing Books and Lala do it. And of course her channel is, much bigger than mine. So credit where credit is due because her video ideas are always fantastic. But I'm sure I'm not exactly like taking away from her audience in any sense. However, she did inspire me to look back through my Goodreads, which I sorted by date published. And so I'm kind of just trusting that the data on there is correct. And I basically wanted to say, or see rather, if I could say that I have a favorite book or a book that I've loved from every single year since I was born. And so I thought like, okay, I probably have read a book from every year since I was born because I have read a fair amount of backlist fantasy, like when you talk about the Robert Jordan and the Robin Hobb and the George R.R. Martin, and even like Sanderson, Scott Lynch, Joe Abercrombie, like a bunch of those authors were writing kind of like in the 90s into the 2000s. Like I think I'll be able to do this. So I looked into it and I do in fact have a book that I have read from every single year since the year I was born, which is 1997. And so let's go through and see what my favorite is from every single year. And I will tell you right now, the closer we get to the present day, I completely fell off the wagon because there are so many favorites. So, like I said, I was born in 1997, so that is the year we start with, and my favorite book from that year is Assassin's Quest, which is the finale to the Farseer trilogy, and spoiler alert, you're gonna see Robin Hobb on this list a lot because I have not read a ton of books from the late 90s and early 2000s, but let's continue. In 1998, I have two books that are favorites because I couldn't choose between them. So that is A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin and Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is the first live ship traders book. And A Clash of Kings, of course, is the second book in A Song of Ice and Fire. But while A Game of Thrones is a favorite for me, that actually came out in 1996. So that one predates my life just by a little. Honestly, you're basically just gonna see the empty spot on my Robin Hobb shelf keep moving across as we do this. But in 1999, my favorite was The Mad Ship, which is the next book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. And I may as well just pull it off the shelf right now because 2000 was Ship of Destiny, which is the finale of Live Ship Traders, and the other favorite from 2000 was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. You really can't argue with this lineup. Like, even if I had read a lot of books from those years, I feel like this era was inevitably just going to be dominated by the two of them. I mean, mostly Robin Hobb, but like Clash of Kings and Storm of Swords are undeniably favorite books of all time for me, so this is what was gonna happen. 2001 actually was a little bit of a weak year aside from this, but the pick for me is definitely Fool's Errand, the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy. This book felt like coming home. I loved the feeling of reading this, and it doesn't really matter if the rest of this year didn't yield anything because this is definitely a favorite book. Then in 2002, we actually have the first year without a Robin Hobb book, and that is because Night Watch by Terry Pratchett takes the spot. Not only is this my favorite book from the Watch series, I think this is my favorite Discworld book. It is so good, but like, you need that context that is given by reading the first 5 books in this series to appreciate this so much, and it's just a masterpiece. 2003, my favorite is Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. So if you're keeping track and paying attention, the only book we've skipped so far is The Golden Fool, and I think that for me is just because, not that I didn't enjoy Golden Fool, but it was a step down in the middle of Tawny Man compared to the first and the third book, and I love Fool's Fate so much, and it is what it is. So it's not that Golden Fool's a bad book. However, it does make you feel infuriated, that's for sure. Now, for 2004, we have Going Postal by Terry Pratchett, and I would love to hold that up for you, but it is basically at the bottom of the stack of Terry Pratchett, and I am not upsetting that apple cart right now. So you'll just have to picture it. I will put it on the screen. Pretend I'm holding it. It was by far the best book of 2004 that I read. 2005 was a bit of a weak year, but it did have Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, which is the 11th book in Wheel of Time, and compared to like the slog books, was a complete return to form for me. I loved this book, and I'm so happy that Robert Jordan got to write this as an individual book before he passed away and before the end of the series was taken over by Sanderson, because I didn't want him to go out on a low note with Crossroads of Twilight, so Knife of Dreams was awesome. Now, 2006 came in really strong, but the two that I had to end up picking were Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. These are two of my favorite fantasy books of all time, so they were in the same year together with some Joe Abercrombie and some Daniel Abraham, and it was a tough choice, but I went with two. This is when I was still kind of staying strong. As you can see, things will get worse. So 2007 proved to be one where I couldn't pick. I had to choose three. So we have Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, because this is my favorite of the first Flaw trilogy, so it had to be here. And then we have Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, because while I think Lies of Locke Lamora might be my favorite, they are just so close. I loved both of the first two books in that series so much. I just have to recognize both of them. And then finally, we have A Betrayal in Winter, which is the second Long Price Quartet book. A Shadow in Summer could have had a spot on this list if the other year wasn't super strong, because A Shadow in Summer is the weakest of this series, but Betrayal in Winter is just when it starts getting so phenomenal. Then in 2008, we have The Hero of Ages, the finale to Mistborn Era 1. And then we also have An Autumn War, the third book in the Long Price Quartet. So The Hero of Ages is a phenomenal, explosive conclusion, but An Autumn War is my favorite book in the Long Price Quartet. And so I couldn't leave either of them out. Now, 2009 was a bit of a weird one, because while neither of these books are my favorite from a series, they're both really, really strong contenders. So I couldn't leave them off the list because I do love both of them. And so the first one is The Gathering Storm, book 12 in Wheel of Time. And this was the first Brandon Sanderson book, and I thought that it was really great. It had a great ending. And then you also have The Price of Spring, the finale to the Long Price Quartet. And again, while The Price of Spring is not my favorite from the series as a whole is so phenomenal, and Price of Spring is the thing that brings that together. So I love it, and I can't not talk about that. Now, I'm not sure if it's that the early 2010s were weaker or whether I just have a definitive favorite from each year, but for the next few, it was a lot easier to choose. So for 2010, if you know when this book came out, this is probably a surprise to precisely no one, is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, the start of the Stormlight Archive. This is by far, when I looked at 2010, I was there's no way I'm not picking Way of Kings, and there was also nothing that came close. Then in 2011, we have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I read for the first time before I had read the Iliad, and I read for the second time after I had read the Iliad. And while it didn't hit quite as hard the second time, because not only had I already read it, but I knew what happened in the Iliad, it still hit the same way in terms of me loving it, and so I'm pretty confident of saying that this is a favorite. And to be honest, I didn't know that it had come out as long ago as 2011 for some reason, so I'm glad that this is here to represent that year. Then 2012 was truly a bit of a weaker year. I don't know what happened. Like, I'm surprised that I haven't read more things that came out in 2012, but my pick ended up being The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. And this might be the only year that didn't have a 5-star, I'm not sure. But I did really enjoy The Emperor's Soul, and I think I gave it like 4 or 4.5. But this was just really the only cut and dry pick from 2012, and I don't have this like on its own in a physical copy. It is included in Arcanum Unbounded though. Then 2013 is kind of when things started going either downhill or uphill, depending on how you look at it. Uphill in terms of book quality, but downhill in terms of my ability to choose a book. So this isn't actually that bad because we only have 2 for 2013, but that is Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, which is like such a whimsical, like swashbuckling adventurous book that I loved. And then we have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And technically I should probably only pick this, but they're different. They're so different. Like, this is where it's challenging because you can't compare these directly to each other and choose one of them. And Senlin Ascends is also just awesome. But Ocean at the End of the Lane will probably always be one of my favorite books. So in 2014, we actually have a surprisingly similar scenario to what I just said, because Words of Radiance came out in 2014, and Words of Radiance, like, is basically my favorite fantasy book, or one of. Like, it's hard to unseat this. I do love it so much. But then you also have Arm of the Sphinx, and once again, like, both fantasy, but just so different in their vibes and their tone and like what they're trying to do. And Arm of the Sphinx is a favorite book, like, without a doubt. So like I said, this is where we start going downhill because I just can't choose between these things. These are both favorites, and so like they have to be here. Now, believe it or not, even though the number of books is about to start increasing, tough decisions have already been made. Like, I wanted to put more things on here than I did. So we're at 2015, and the first book to talk about is The Nightingale. This still, I remember the impact it had on me when I read it. It was one of the books that helped me get back into reading, and I loved it. So it deserves its spot here. And then we have And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman, which is a novella about a boy and his grandfather and his dementia. And it's a very emotional, short book that I have some kind of personal connection to. So there's that. And then we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And this is kind of the one that I debated, but I did love this book, and I can see why it has won as many awards as it has. And it's my favorite so far. Like, I haven't finished the series, but I didn't like The Obelisk Gate as much as this. And so I kind of thought, like, I want to recognize The Fifth Season, and this is the chance that this series is going to have to get on the list. Okay, in 2016, we are luckily back to only 2 picks, but these, once again, these are both favorite books of all time as well. So the first one is Beartown by Frederick Bachman, and this still is my favorite Frederick Bachman. This is a perfect standalone to me. I don't care to continue in the series necessarily, but this book like hit me hard, and I don't know, its impact was like so immense. And then the second one is The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Definitely the best, my favorite short story collection that I've ever read. It gave me a taste of what Ken Liu is like as a writer, and made me definitely want to read like The Grace of Kings and The Dandelion Dynasty, even though I already knew I wanted to read that series. So he is a phenomenal writer, and I love both of these so much. Okay, so 2017 is the first year that an author did something truly rude to me and this video concept, which is release 2 books in the same year. Like, what is going on? So basically, The Bear and the Nightingale came out in January of 2017, and The Girl in the Tower came out in December of 2017. I don't know what Catherine Arden thinks she is doing, but I cannot choose between these 2 books. This is one of my favorite series, and I can't do it. I refuse. On principle, I refuse. So both of these our favorite books from 2017. And then the other three, yes, you heard that right, three, are The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Jade City, we have a green vibe, we love a green vibe, and The City of Brass. And I can't, like, you see what's happening? Like, I told you that we were really gonna fall off the wagon the closer we get to the present day. And it's because I've read more books from these years, but like all of these are genuinely favorite books for me. Like, okay, I could maybe part with Jade City because I think it's my least favorite of the trilogy, but once again, the Greenbone Saga is one of my favorite series, so how can I leave that off of there? And it's just unfair. You see, we would have only had 4 if Catherine Arden didn't do what she did and release 2 books in the same year. I don't know what she was thinking. And we're gonna see that happen again on this list, so you just wait for it. Okay, 2018 was actually not too bad. We only have 2 books, so I don't have beef with 2018. However, we have 2 books that have like almost as different of vibes as it is possible to have from each other. So we have Heartstopper, Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, and 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. So, you know, we have like fluffy romance. Recommend this 100%. If you haven't watched the show on Netflix, please watch the show. You're gonna melt. And then we have like hard-hitting nonfiction. If you're Canadian, you need to read this book because I guarantee you that you probably don't know the things. I didn't know a lot of them, and a lot of them still impact Indigenous people to this day. So it's really important knowledge to have as a Canadian human being, and I absolutely recommend that you read this book. In 2019, it all falls apart again because there's 5 books here, like, and I can't even blame the fact that there are 2 published in the same year. There are just genuinely 5 books here. So we have When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. This is a relatively recent read for me, but absolutely fascinating. It is history and science told in like a narrative style, so it is sort of like fictional nonfiction, if you will. The people are real, the science is real, but it's like taken liberties with the stories in order to tell it in a more compelling narrative way. And then we have The Hod King by Josiah Bancroft, which along with Arm of the Sphinx are my collective favorites from the Books of Babel series. Then we have The Kingdom of Copper, sequel to City of Brass. There is a little bit of recency bias factoring in here, however, these books are so good. Kingdom of Copper was even better than City of Brass, and I already considered City of Brass like a favorite. Kingdom of Copper was like blowing it out of the water, undoubtedly a favorite book. Then we have Winter of the Witch, which of course is the conclusion to the trilogy who had 2 books published in the same year, the Winter Night trilogy. And this is, okay, admittedly not my favorite of the series, however, a great conclusion, and I always respect the concluding book of a series that I love because that means that it stuck the landing and it really brought it all together for me and made it a favorite series. And then we have Jade War, which is, I mean, it is a step up from Jade City, I will admit that, because I remember how I felt when I read them, but this is so good. It's so good. Like, how can I distinguish between these favorites? You cannot expect me to, and don't tell me that I'm the one that came up with the idea for this video because I wasn't. I stole it, so can't be blamed. Okay, we're moving on to 2020, where once again I have 4 books, which is an improvement from 5. You can do the math on that. And the first one is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And so I've spoke about this before, where at the time when I read this, pretty sure I gave it 4 stars. However, the staying power of Piranesi has made me realize how much I love it. And this is a book that I feel like I will always think about and I should reread. Then we have The Empire of Gold. And while I think Kingdom of Copper might be my favorite in the Daevabad trilogy, maybe, this was such a good conclusion. Like, there's not enough separating them that I can say which one is really my favorite and which one's not. Because like I said about conclusions, this did everything that I wanted it to for the series. Then we have Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This is like a climate fiction book about a woman named Franny who has a dark past, and she convinces a sea captain to take her on because she is trying to track some of the world's last Arctic terns. And if she can track birds, she can bring the boat to fish, and all of them can benefit and stuff like that. Love Charlotte McConaughey, phenomenal author. And we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And so we kind of see a trend here again where all of these books are different from each other, so I can't knock one of them off. I read this book in like less than 24 hours and I loved it so much. And I never realized at the time how divisive and controversial this one was going to be because people seem to either love it or hate it. So I'm almost scared to reread it, but at the time I fell so much in love with it. Okay, so 2021 is the next year where we're gonna see an author duo, in this case, just absolutely disrespect me by publishing 2 books in the same year. What the heck? So this is The Mask of Mirrors and The Liar's Knot. And this is the Rook and Rose trilogy, which has its finale coming out in August. And this is my most anticipated book of the year. I love this series so much. I can't wait to see what the finale holds. And once again, this is like a January, December release. Like, I didn't even realize. I thought one of these had come out in 2022, but I was wrong. So they both have to be on here because they are literally equal. I love them both. Then, of course, we have Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, the finale to the Greenbone saga, and it's a favorite series. This book made me cry on multiple occasions. It was so good. It's so good. And then we have some non-fantasy representation. So we have Finley Donovan is Killing It, which I don't have a physical copy of because I listened to it on audiobook, but that is sort of like a comedy thriller, and it's amazing. I 110% recommend. And then we have another Charlotte McConaughey, Once There Were Wolves. So even though Migrations came out first, this is the first one that I read, and I did originally listen to it on audio. And it's another like sort of climate fiction where in this one our main character Inti is trying to rewild the Highlands of Scotland with wolves, but the locals like very aggressively push back against not wanting wolves in their like area, neck of the woods, I guess you could say. And so it's sort of like a murder mystery where it's set up where you don't really know whether the wolves have killed someone or whether someone has committed this crime, trying to make it look like it was the wolves in order to not have them like released into the wild. We are in the home stretch. 2022 and 2023 are not as obnoxious as the rest of these years, I promise. Okay, so for books released in 2022, I read a fair few, and so the ones that I chose as my favorites are Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which I don't have a copy of because it was actually a Christmas gift for Ben, but he let me read it while he was here, and then he obviously took it with him when he went back home because it belongs to him. It was nice of him to let me read it. And then I also chose Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, the ultimate cozy fantasy taking the world by storm, and I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So once again, you kind of have like 3 very different books: fantasy, literary fiction, and like hard-hitting memoir. This was quite emotional and quite like honest and raw, and I definitely would recommend it. However, definitely trigger warning for eating disorders and an unhealthy relationship with food in this one, so be mindful of that, but I would recommend a lot of people read I'm Glad My Mom Died. And then finally, for the present year, which of course is not finished, so I could have more favorites to add, but this is going to be Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, and this is actually the only 2023 release that I've read, and so that doesn't take away from how much I enjoyed it. It definitely deserves to be here, but I guess I'm lucky that the only book that I've read so far that's been released this year has been a winner. So now that we've gone through all the years, just to give you a little bit of an idea of how colossally I failed at this, there are 26 years listed here. I am not yet actually 26 years old. However, we have obviously begun the year in which I'm going to turn 26. So, like, if I succeeded, I would have picked 26 books, right? One for each year. I picked 57 books, so that is more than twice my age. Which actually, you know what, I'm not gonna lie, that's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be, because that's an average of like just barely over 2 books a year. So I can live with that. But there was only 10 years where I succeeded in picking just one favorite book. So that means that there were 16 years where I picked 2 or more. And of course, you know, there are years when I picked like 5. So the average, you know what, the average is actually not that bad. I can live with that. And I hope that you found this interesting. I don't know, I found it really fun to go through and make this list. And part of what makes it so interesting is that a lot of the times, like, I forget how long it's been, since these books came out. When I want to read something, release year or release date is not really a factor for me. So a lot of these, like, I had no idea when they even came out. And so this was just a fun exercise to kind of illustrate things. And Kayla definitely did a better job on this video than me, which is, like, it just goes to show how strong she is, because that woman definitely has read like way more books from each year than I have, like, in recent years, and yet she still managed to pick like 1 or 2. So I can't pretend like I'm good at this, but when I saw her do this video, which I don't know if I mentioned, but I will have it linked in the description, I just thought it would be really fun, and I had to do it. So here we are finished. If you actually made it to this point, thank you for sticking around, and please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I post new videos on most Mondays and Thursdays, and as always, I'll have my joint Discord with Ben and my socials linked in the description below if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!